A New York Post columnist extraordinary and Fox News contributor. Mollie Hemingway, editor-in-chief of The Federalist, a must-read, and also a must-read and a Fox News contributor. Rich Lowry, editor-in-chief of the National Review. Good to see you all here. Miranda, let me go to you first, because 60 Minutes had kind of a fawning report on European censorship, of all things. They were interviewing some German prosecutors about censorship, and they were pretty proud to talk about it. Roll tape on that.
Is it a crime to insult somebody in public?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
And it's a crime to insult them online as well?
Yes.
The fine could be even higher if you insult someone in the internet.
Okay, but that didn't exactly mesh with the message that our new vice president brought over to them on Friday. Let me just play a little bit of that. Roll that tape.
If you're running in fear of your own voters, there is nothing America can do for you. We shouldn't be afraid of our people, even when they express views that disagree with their leadership.
What a contrast. It's freedom spelled out there by the vice president versus censorship.
Absolutely. That was an example of America leading the world and warning Europe the dark veil of censorship is coming down on their continent, and no better proof than those three not-so-wise monkeys, those prosecutors on CBS. It was Orwellian, just proudly talking about how they are criminalising speech. They obviously think that they have to destroy democracy to save it. And thank God that J.D. Vance did go over there in that very public forum and tell them what America feels, and that really this is a make or break issue with the alliance.
And Mollie, there's also a contrast in character. You look at the character of Donald Trump, who withstood an assassin's bullet. You look at the character of I believe he was a German leader there who fell into tears talking about how he wasn't getting everything he wanted. I mean, you know, it's a pretty clear distinction between two very different styles. And what brought us through World War II, working with European leaders, were not the kind of tears that we saw from that German leader.
And the same German leader was the one who laughed when Donald Trump gave a speech at the UN talking about Germany's need to have energy independence from Russia. He thought that was so ludicrous.
Right,
and here we have this situation where really it's interesting to bring up World War II. We're saying, should we really have the same exact situation we had immediately after World War II, where we had a trade architecture and a defense posture to lift up all of these European countries because they had been so destroyed by World War II? We're 80 years later, and a lot of people want to keep that exact same structure. And Europe is saying, yeah, we'll let the United States handle our defense. We'll build up our welfare state while they handle our defense. And Trump and Vance are saying that's not going to happen anymore. But that broad, wonderful call for freedom, the saying that we care about freedom of speech and freedom of religion,
and
a lot
freedom
of Americans,
of the economy, freedom of finance as well. And you know, going back to World War II, another reference of it was made over the weekend, Rich, and that was by Margaret Brennan of ABC, although she didn't get the response she was hoping for when she was making claims about free speech being responsible for the rise of Nazi Germany to Secretary of State Rubio. Listen to this.
Why would our allies or anybody be irritated by free speech and by someone giving their opinion? We are, after all, democracies.
Well, he was standing in a country where free speech was weaponized to conduct a genocide.
I have to disagree with you. Free speech was not used to conduct a genocide. There was no free speech in Nazi Germany.
What do you make of that?
It's amazing you have an argument of whether free speech was responsible for Nazi Germany or not. Of course it wasn't free speech in Nazi Germany. And the logic of Brennan's position is we've had the First Amendment for more than 200 years. That should have led directly to gas chambers here in the United States because we have the freest speech of anywhere in the world.
Good point.
And Vance's speech is really about how the First Amendment is one of the wonders of the world and is totally different than the approach of the rest of the world. And what was referred to accurately as these Orwellian censors in Germany, that was the model the left wanted to import here. The Biden administration was pressuring social media companies. Social media companies were adopting that approach on their own. And the election threw this switch where hopefully we've seen the end of that model here in the United States. And now you have a vice president of the United States going over to Europe and telling them that approach is wrong there, too.
And of course, Miranda, our economy is one of the wonders of the world as well. And we were presenting the success of our economy as an example for decades, for centuries to the rest of the world. Then we had this crazy administration the last 4 years that was trying to import the European model, this sort of semi-quasi-socialist where leaders are crying, thinking about, their future, et cetera. I mean, why import from Europe a mediocre at best economic model and political leaders at best who just keep the ball rolling with the exchange of getting Donald Trump? I mean, there's just no contest.
No, there isn't. And look, the other thing the Biden administration did was try to use Europe to impose those social media censorship regimes that they wanted to use here and were not allowed to because, thank God, for the First Amendment. We saw that Europe took that up with gusto, and the Biden administration was hoping that they could suppress free speech, but also elections in the way that the Europeans want to. We had a European poobah saying just recently that, and J.D. Vance mentioned in his speech, that we cancelled the elections in Romania. We can do the same thing in Germany. Germany is just about to have an election. There's a right-wing populist anti-immigration group, AfD, that is looking pretty competitive.
But democracy be damned, we'll never let them get, even if the people
Exactly.
want them,
we'll cancel that election if the people want it.
And migration is driving a lot of this because what the European elite didn't want to have a debate over immigration. And the European publics, by and large, do not support the open border policies you've gotten from the elite in Europe. Here, where you have a much freer system, Donald Trump could say everything they don't want people to say in Europe, and the public supports it.
Well, Mollie, then we have Zelensky. What do we do with Zelensky? I mean, Zelensky, we have given him how many? $200 billion, more or less, and he can't find a lot of that. A lot of those billions have just seemingly disappeared. And now he says he's not going to allow Donald Trump to negotiate some kind of understanding with Russia unless he's a part of it. How do we deal with the Ukrainian war? 1 million people have been died or injured as a result of that war. 1 million people on both sides. I think the Russians have lost about 400,000, the Ukrainians about 600,000.
It's been horrific destruction in Ukraine. And nobody's really talked about it as much as they should. And nobody in the entire procedure of the war has talked about how you could actually win a war against Russia with all of its nuclear capabilities. And so what you're seeing Trump and Vance doing now is saying, we just have to be realistic. We might not wish that Russia had the power that it has or that it had invaded Ukraine, but we're not going back to pre-2014 borders. And this really needs to end because the carnage is unthinkable. You're absolutely right. 1 million casualties, and just particularly of a certain age range in Ukraine that will be difficult to recover from. Everyone in that room who was crying with the German leader, they were happy to have this war continue at untold cost, covered by the American taxpayer, and they didn't care about the destruction, and they didn't care how long it lasted.
And Miranda, bringing it back to Biden, Biden didn't require any kind of accountability from Zelensky. I mean, that's really the point. He, again, I understand he's been a heroic figure at times in this whole thing, standing up to Russia as he did with our might and our dollars behind him. But it seemed that Biden was letting him, like, a child, let him get away with anything and they'll take as much more of it than they deserve or can keep account of himself. He, again, himself admits that he's lost billions.
Exactly. And look, I think Donald Trump is perfectly right when he says this never would have happened, this war never would have happened if he had been president. We had Joe Biden giving these mixed messages, offering for Ukraine to join NATO and then not offering, saying a minor incursion by Russia wouldn't be a problem. He bungled this from the start, just like the withdrawal from Afghanistan and the tragic numbers of death that we've seen, the death toll, and it's changed the the relationship between Russia and the West forever. Russia is now in the arms of China. I don't think that's something that will be easily unpicked.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a disaster for many generations to come.
Rich, let me bring it home domestically to what is going on with Doge and the attempts by Democrats to demonize Elon Musk. It ain't going so well for them. I mean, you look at the polls all say they kind of like the way things are going with making our government accountable. The same way that Zelensky wasn't held accountable, our own government wasn't held accountable for many more billions of dollars. I think the Democrats are just losing. They have nowhere to go.
Yeah, so the federal workforce means a lot to them. This is their political base, right? But most people, like, yeah, let's reduce the federal workforce. It's common sense and one of the most popular things Trump is doing. Now, all this will be litigated. And the administration is on the strongest ground, anything having to do with personnel. Can you fire someone? Can you promote this person, this person, all that? What I think is going to be the interesting issue is, can you zero out a federal agency that Congress has authorized, or in effect zero it out? I think that's a much more interesting legal question.
By the way,
but I think
wasn't that done with the CAB, with the Civil Aeronautics Board? Because that was zeroed out by, interestingly, a Democrat. Carter was the one who started the process. I think the process finished under Reagan, but he started the process. He hired Al Kahn to be the director of CAB, and eventually he killed it himself.
Yeah, well, I think
it's
the issue is
self-destructed.
if the executives created it,
Yeah.
the executive can roll it back.
Yeah.
The question is, if Congress has specifically authorized it, does the executive have the authority to say, no, we're not going to do that?
Okay, well, Mollie's the only one here who actually lives in D.C., sees what's going on. I mean, describe for us, give us the color of what's happening inside the Beltway.
Yeah,
right
the
now.
neighborhood chats are quite, the people are frenzied about what might happen. They've had a very nice life. They've been able to get really high salaries, amazing benefits packages, and work from home, in some cases, not doing a ton of work. There are some people who work very hard for the federal government. Federal employees know more than anyone, that a lot of people don't. And so there's panic there. But I totally agree with what Rich is saying, and it shows why Congress really needs to assert its authority here, too. They were the ones who were really responsible for this bloated, unconstitutional administrative state growing. They need to be part of the solution, and they need to support this by working with the president on tightening up this government.
I haven't
anything
yet
that's
seen,
ambiguous.
I haven't yet seen, though, let me just stick with Mollie for a second. I haven't yet seen Trump step in and use all of his political capital to swat the behinds of these Republicans who aren't getting in line and with one beautiful bill, right?
Yeah, well, I think he really wants to get all of his nominees confirmed, but he will need to work with them.
Rich, I'm
But
sorry.
I think there's a key point. Anything that's legally ambiguous, just have Congress pass it, and that ends the legal problem.
Yeah, yeah.
And why on earth could anyone object to auditing the federal government? That's all Doge is doing,
Right.
auditing. And then we can decide what we're going to cut out.
Well, remember, Ron Paul tried to audit the Fed for many years. And just one organization, the Federal Reserve, he couldn't get anybody to go along with him. By the way, do you think it's going to be done, everything that Trump wants, and with all this political capital and the support of the American people behind him?
Well, it's just amazing when you think back to what people were saying in the last 4 years, that if Trump were reelected, that he wouldn't have good people working with him and that nothing would get done. And just in a month, you have seen such amazing work. Who knows what is ahead?
And his popularity is soaring. I mean, it was up at 53%. It's higher than it ever has been.
It really is. Miranda, Rich, Mollie, thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.